The crystal water pitcher left rings on the mahogany table, perfect overlapping circles that caught the afternoon light slanting through the attorney's office windows. Marcus Chen watched his daughter Vanessa scroll through her phone while the lawyer droned through beneficiary clauses, her thumb moving in that practiced rhythm people develop when they're mentally somewhere else entirely. Derek, his son-in-law, sat beside her with one knee bouncing, that restless energy of a man who has 7 other places to be and wants you to know it without saying so. The attorney's voice was pleasant, professional, the kind of smooth that comes from repeating the same phrases 5 times a week for 20 years. Marcus had his reading glasses on, the document in front of him, every clause allocating his life's work to Vanessa and her children. It seemed right when he drafted it. Past tense already doing work in his mind he hadn't quite acknowledged yet. So if you'll just initial here, Mr. Chen, and here. The attorney slid the pages across, his pen making a soft tick against the wood. Marcus picked up the pen. Vanessa glanced up, smiled briefly, went back to her phone. Derek checked his watch, caught Marcus noticing, and turned it into a wrist stretch. Smooth. Everything about Derek was smooth, from his Tesla to his talking points. The man could pivot a conversation like a yacht changing course, all efficiency and no wake. Actually, Marcus said, setting the pen down, I should mention, my hip surgery is scheduled for Thursday. Pre-op appointment is Wednesday afternoon. He said it casually, the way you mentioned needing to pick up milk. Just information. Vanessa's thumb stopped mid-scroll. Derek's knee went still. The attorney looked up with that practiced expression of polite interest that probably worked on estate sales and property disputes, but felt thin here, in this room that suddenly had different air in it. Wednesday? Vanessa's voice carried a note Marcus knew well, the one that came before logistical rearrangement. Dad, that's my book club fundraiser. We've had it on the calendar for months. The venue, the catering, I'm hosting. She said hosting the way generals say campaign. Derek leaned forward, his smile engaging, reasonable. He had a good smile. Marcus had always thought so, even now. Dad, it's elective, right? You've waited, 6 months already? Derek used Dad like a business title, the kind of familiarity that sounded warm in conference rooms. Another couple weeks won't make a difference. These things are flexible. He said flexible the way you describe a meeting that can be moved, a dinner reservation that can be bumped. Vanessa was nodding, her relief visible, already problem-solving in that efficient way she'd learned somewhere between her MBA and her current role as director of something Marcus could never quite remember the full title of. The attorney's pen paused halfway to the signature page. The moment, stretched. Marcus looked at the water pitcher, at the rings it left, at how they overlapped but never quite matched up. Sure, he said. I'll call the surgeon's office, reschedule. His voice came out easy, agreeable. Vanessa's face brightened immediately. She stood, gathered her purse, Italian leather, a Christmas gift from Derek's bonus 2 years ago, and came around the table to kiss his cheek. Her perfume was expensive. Everything about his daughter was expensive now, including her time. You're the best, Dad. I knew you'd understand. She squeezed his shoulder. Derek stood too, extending his hand for that firm shake he probably practiced, the kind that said, I respect you, while his eyes said I have a quarterly earnings call in 40 minutes. We'll do dinner soon, catch up properly. He patted Marcus's shoulder on the way out, a gesture that might have been affectionate or might have been punctuation. The attorney cleared his throat softly, shuffled papers, pretended he hadn't witnessed whatever had just happened. Marcus sat in his Volvo in the parking garage for 7 minutes before starting the engine. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that industrial frequency that sounds like emptiness with electricity running through it. He'd watched Vanessa and Derek walk to their Tesla, watched them pull out smoothly, Derek's hand casual on the wheel. They hadn't looked back. Why would they? Everything was settled. The will was ready for signatures next week. The hip could wait. The book club fundraiser could not. It made sense, really, if you organized your life by urgency and importance in neat quadrants. His hip was important but not urgent. The fundraiser was both. Simple math. His reflection in the rear-view mirror looked back at him with an expression he didn't recognize immediately. Not anger, not even hurt exactly. Something quieter. The look of a man who just learned something he'd probably known for a while but hadn't had language for until the words elective and flexible landed in the same 60 seconds. He started the car, drove home, parked in his usual spot. The house was exactly as he'd left it that morning, Linda's novels still on the shelf, the kitchen table where they'd eaten breakfast for 34 years, the will documents he'd printed last week stacked beside his reading glasses like homework he'd been diligent about completing. He made tea, Earl Grey, the way Linda had taught him, with the water just off boil. Let it steep 4 minutes, no more, no less. He didn't drink it, just watched the steam rise and dissipate, the mug warming his hands. The room felt larger than usual. Not empty, exactly. Spacious. Like when you remove a piece of furniture you'd stopped seeing and suddenly notice how much floor you actually have. He picked up his phone 3 times, put it down 3 times. The screen stayed dark, no messages, no missed calls. Just the photo background, him and Linda at the Grand Canyon 10 years ago, both of them squinting into the sun and grinning like idiots. She'd made him wear that ridiculous hat. He'd complained the whole hike up. In the photo, his arm was around her waist, her head tilted toward his shoulder, and neither of them knew she had 4 years left. Late that night, Marcus sat at his desk, the oak one Linda had found at an estate sale, and refinished herself. Back when refinishing furniture seemed like a reasonable hobby and not a luxury reserved for people with time. He uncapped his fountain pen, the one his father had given him when he graduated college, back when fountain pens meant something about permanence and intention. Opened a fresh legal pad, the blue lines were crisp, waiting. He wrote 1 sentence at the top of the page, his handwriting still steady despite the arthritis the doctor said was mild, but felt less mild at night. Drew a line under the sentence. Then another line. The blue ink looked darker than he remembered, or maybe it was just the desk lamp, or maybe everything looked different now. The sentence sat there, clear and simple. What do I actually want to matter? Morning came the way mornings do, indifferent to revelations and late-night handwriting. Marcus called Dr. Patel's office at 8:30, when he knew the receptionist would be settling in with her coffee. She answered on the second ring, her voice cheerful in that practiced medical office way. Dr. Patel's office, this is Marie. She'd been Dr. Patel's receptionist for 6 years. She always asked about Linda before remembering. Marie, it's Marcus Chen. I need to cancel my pre-op appointment. Wednesday afternoon. The words came out smooth, factual. He'd always been good at sounding reasonable. Marie's cheerfulness dimmed immediately, replaced by concern that sounded genuine, which somehow made it worse. Cancel? Mr. Chen, your surgery's Thursday. If we cancel pre-op, we'll have to reschedule the whole— He cut her off gently, his voice apologetic. Family emergency. I'm so sorry. I'll call back to reschedule once things settle. He hung up before she could ask what kind of emergency, before the concern in her voice could solidify into questions he'd have to answer with lies that felt heavier than the truth. Set the phone on the kitchen table beside the will documents, stared at them both, the phone and the papers, 2 things that suddenly seemed related in ways he was just beginning to map. The public library smelled like old paper and floor polish, and the particular silence of people trying not to disturb other people. Marcus found himself in the genealogy section, pulling books on estate planning he didn't need, had already read variations of, knew the contents of by heart. Really, he just wanted to be around people who weren't related to him. Strangers had an honesty to them, a lack of expectation. The elderly woman at the next table was researching her family tree, muttering softly to herself about census records. 2 high school kids studied calculus, their textbooks open, occasionally helping each other through problems with the easy generosity of people who hadn't yet learned to be stingy with their time. At the reference desk, a man asked for help finding something about civil engineering, and the librarian, young, maybe 25, walked him through 3 different resources with a patience that seemed almost extravagant. When was the last time someone had given him 10 uninterrupted minutes of attention? He sat there for 2 hours, pretending to read, actually just watching people be decent to each other for no particular reason other than that decency seemed like the default setting. When he finally left, he felt steadier. Or maybe steadier wasn't the word. Clearer. Like he'd been walking around in prescription glasses that weren't quite right and had finally taken them off. The coffee shop was busy with the afternoon crowd. Laptops open, conversations overlapping, the espresso machine hissing periodically like punctuation. Marcus ordered black coffee and a cranberry scone he knew he wouldn't finish but bought anyway because buying something felt like participation. Found a small table near the window where the light was good and the noise was just white enough to think inside. 2 20-somethings at the next table were deep in a discussion that had the intensity of a negotiation. The young woman, dark hair in a bun, laptop open, was saying something about rent and fairness. Her companion, a guy with glasses and the kind of beard people grow when they're trying to look older, kept shaking his head. "I paid last month and this month," the woman said, her voice low but sharp. "You said you'd cover utilities. That was the deal." The guy sighed, the kind of sigh that wants credit for patience. "I've been slammed at work, you know that. It's not like I'm avoiding it." The woman leaned back, arms crossed. "Family is supposed to show up. That's what you said when you wanted to move in together. We're family now, remember?" Marcus took a sip of coffee, kept his eyes on the window, but he was listening. Sure, he thought. What could go wrong? The guy muttered something about being dramatic. The woman stood up, grabbed her laptop, walked out without another word. The guy sat there, looked at his phone, didn't follow. Marcus ate a bite of scone. It was dry. Everything was dry lately, or maybe his mouth was just dry. Or maybe the world had always been this dry and he was just noticing. He left after 20 minutes, the scone mostly intact on the plate, the coffee 2/3 gone. Drove without direction for a while, the radio off, just the sound of traffic and his own breathing. Linda's grave was in the older section of Riverside Cemetery, under an oak tree that dropped acorns in September and leaves in October. The leaves were everywhere now, yellow and brown, some still falling in that slow spiral that looks peaceful from a distance and melancholy up close. Her headstone was simple, her name, her dates, the line from Whitman she'd loved, "I bequeath myself to the dirt to grow from the grass I love." Marcus hadn't visited in 2 months. Kept meaning to, kept not doing it. He stood there now, hands in his pockets, October wind cold against his face. "So I was supposed to have surgery on Thursday," he said out loud, not caring if anyone heard. An elderly couple 2 rows over glanced his way, kept walking. "Vanessa needed me to reschedule. Book club fundraiser?" Derek called it elective. He paused, listened to the wind in the oak branches. "Elective. Like I elected to have arthritis eat my hip joint. Like I elected to wake up at 3 a.m. because rolling over feels like grinding glass." The wind picked up. A yellow leaf landed on the headstone. He brushed it off gently. "You would have told her no. You were always better at no." His voice cracked slightly. He cleared his throat. "I'm thinking about changing the will. The whole thing. I don't know yet. Just thinking." The couple was gone now, just Marcus and Linda and a cemetery full of people who'd had their chances to say things and hadn't. He stood there another 10 minutes, not talking, just being there. Finally touched the top of the headstone, cold granite under his palm, and walked back to his car. Felt like he'd asked permission for something and received it, though the permission was probably just his own mind playing tricks, giving him what he needed to hear from a source he trusted more than himself. The hardware store was supposed to be a quick errand, picture hooks, maybe a new smoke detector battery. Became 2 hours somehow. Marcus found himself in the wood stain aisle, looking at samples he had no project for, no reason to examine. A teenage clerk, couldn't be more than 17, acne on his chin, name tag that said Josh, asked if he needed help. Marcus almost said no, the automatic response, but didn't. "I'm thinking about refinishing a desk," he said, surprising himself. "Oak, pretty old. What would you recommend?" Josh's face brightened immediately, became animated in that way young people get when they actually know something and get to share it. He pulled down 3 samples, golden oak, provincial, dark walnut, explained the difference in grain enhancement, in how long each took to dry, and what kind of finish coat worked best with which stain. Spoke with a seriousness that suggested he took wood stain very personally, or at least more personally than Marcus had expected a teenager to take anything. When Josh finished, Marcus thanked him, bought nothing, and left feeling more seen than he'd felt in the attorney's office with his daughter and son-in-law nodding along to inheritance clauses. That evening, Marcus sat in his living room with the will document open on his lap. Every clause allocated to Vanessa and her children. The grandchildren would get trust funds at 25. Vanessa would get the house, the investments, the retirement. Accounts. It was fair, reasonable. He'd written it assuming love flowed both directions, that family was a circuit with electricity moving through it evenly. Now he looked at the clauses and saw a map of his assumptions. The red pen sat on the side table. He picked it up, put it down, picked it up again, made no marks yet, just held the possibility of marks, the potential for change. The pen was light in his hand, lighter than it should be for what it represented. His phone sat on the coffee table, face up. He texted Vanessa, rescheduled the surgery, all good. Sent it, watched the screen. Typing indicator appeared, those 3 dots that meant someone was composing a response, thinking about what to say. The dots appeared and disappeared twice. Finally, a message came through. A single thumbs-up emoji, nothing more. No, when is it now? Or, how are you feeling? Or, sorry we had to ask. Just a yellow hand with the thumb extended, universal symbol for message received. Moving on. Marcus set the phone face down on the table, stood up, poured himself scotch from the bottle Linda had given him on their last anniversary, the one they'd celebrated at that Italian place downtown where the waiter had sung. Neat. 2 fingers. Sat back down. The silence wasn't lonely, that was the strange part. It was clarifying, like someone had turned up the contrast on a photograph and suddenly you could see details you'd been missing. Joel answered on the 3rd ring, his voice warm with the familiarity of 47 years of friendship. Marcus, my man, what's happening? They'd been college roommates, survived organic chemistry and bad cafeteria food and heartbreak and graduation together, had stood up at each other's weddings, visited each other in hospitals. Some friendships age like wine, some age like buildings, solid, reliable, increasingly valuable for their foundation. Joel was a building. You free for lunch tomorrow? That Vietnamese place? Marcus heard dishes clinking in the background, Joel's wife saying something indistinct. Yeah, absolutely. Noon work? They confirmed details, hung up. Marcus sat with his scotch, the will document still on his lap, and realized he'd just done something he hadn't done in months, reached out first. Asked for what he needed instead of waiting to be offered. Small thing. Maybe not so small. The Vietnamese restaurant had been their spot for 15 years, ever since Joel discovered it during a work assignment and dragged Marcus there on the promise of the best pho in the state. The promise had held up. They sat in their usual booth, the one by the window with the good light, menus they didn't need because they always ordered the same thing. Joel looked good. Retired life was agreeing with him, made him relaxed in a way corporate America never had. They ordered. Joel asked about the hip. Marcus told him about the surgery, the rescheduling, the book club fundraiser. Watched Joel's face shift from casual interest to something harder, something that looked like recognition. That's cold, man. Joel said it simply, no dramatics, just fact. The server brought their waters, sliced lime floating in each glass. Marcus squeezed his lime, watched the juice cloud the water. She's busy. Derek works 80-hour weeks. The grandkids have activities. I get it. He heard how he sounded, reasonable, understanding. Joel heard it too, tilted his head slightly. You defending them or yourself? Direct. That was Joel. Marcus took a sip of water. Didn't answer immediately. Outside the window, 2 women walked by with strollers, talking and laughing, their whole afternoon apparently dedicated to each other and their babies and nothing else. When did Vanessa last have a whole afternoon for him? Joel leaned back, his expression shifting to something that looked like he was deciding whether to say what he was thinking. He said it. My daughter borrowed $30,000 2 years ago. Emergency, she said. Business opportunity. Promised she'd pay me back within the year. He paused. Their pho arrived, steam rising from the bowls, basil and lime on the side. Joel picked up his chopsticks. She's never mentioned it, not once. Called me last month asking for advice on which new car to buy. A $60,000 SUV. Joel took a bite, chewed, swallowed. I stopped expecting acknowledgement, not because I don't deserve it, because I was making myself crazy thinking I did. Marcus stirred his pho, the noodles swirling beneath the surface. You made peace with it? Joel shrugged. Made peace is generous. More like I accepted that she's who she is, not who I wanted her to be. Doesn't mean I keep giving her money. Means I stopped building my sense of worth around whether she appreciates what I already gave. They ate in silence for a while, the good kind of silence where both people are thinking and neither feels pressure to fill space with noise. Marcus realized Joel had already walked a path he was just finding the trailhead for. Walking back to his car after lunch, Marcus passed a hospice thrift store he'd driven by 1,000 times without noticing. Something made him stop. The window display had a poster. Every item has a story. Give it a new chapter. Inside, the store smelled like old books and lavender sachets. A volunteer, an elderly woman with bright pink glasses, smiled at him. Looking for anything in particular? He wasn't. But he found himself drawn to a chess set, vintage wood pieces in a worn box, $11 according to the masking tape price tag. Bought it. Carried it to his car. Sat with it on his lap for a moment, wondering who'd owned it, who'd played these pieces, what hands had touched them, and why whoever inherited it decided a thrift store was the right ending to that story. That night, Marcus set up the chess set on his dining room table. He hadn't played chess since Linda died. They used to play every Sunday evening, a ritual they'd maintained. Through career changes and raising Vanessa and his father's decline and everything else life threw at them. He'd boxed up their set afterward, couldn't look at it without seeing her hand hovering over pieces, that little furrow between her eyebrows when she was thinking 3 moves ahead. This new set had no memories attached, just smooth wood pieces and a board with water stains in 2 corners and the possibility of starting again. He played both sides, white and black, moving around the table like someone switching seats at a restaurant to see the view from different angles. Forgot about his hip, forgot about the will, forgot about book club fundraisers and Derek's smooth voice and Vanessa's thumbs-up emoji. Just moved pieces, thought through strategy, felt the rhythm of the game settle into his bones like muscle memory from another life. 2 hours passed. He didn't win. You can't win when you're playing both sides. But he felt something unlock in his chest, some tension he'd been carrying since the attorney's office, maybe longer. The hip pain was manageable tonight. Had always been manageable, really. He just needed something to blame for the larger ache. Later, sitting at his laptop in the small office that used to be Linda's sewing room, Marcus pulled up his bank accounts. The balances stared back at him, numbers that represented decades of work, careful saving, decent investments, modest living, the retirement account his father had helped him start at 23, the investment portfolio from the inheritance when Linda's parents died, the savings account that grew steadily every month because he and Linda had never been extravagant, never needed to be. In his mind, these numbers had always been earmarked for Vanessa's future, for the grandchildren's education, for making sure his daughter never worried about money the way he'd worried in his 20s. The numbers suddenly looked like a score he'd been keeping in a game no one else was playing. He opened a new browser tab, typed charitable trusts into the search bar, started reading, clicked through links, estate planning attorneys, nonprofit organizations, foundation structures, found himself on the website for an arts program that taught painting and sculpture to kids in underserved neighborhoods. Clicked through their gallery, children's artwork, bright colors, raw emotion, a self-portrait by a girl named Jasmine who'd written beneath it, "This is me being brave." Marcus looked at that painting for a long time. Moved on to a hospice music foundation that brought live musicians to bedsides, played requests, held hands, made the exit gentler. Then a scholarship fund for first-generation college students, kids whose parents hadn't gone to college, who needed someone to believe in them with money behind the belief. He read for 2 hours. Took notes on the legal pad. Realized his money could tell a story he actually wanted told. Could land somewhere it would be felt, not just allocated. The clock on the wall, Linda's grandmother's clock, the one that chimed on the hour, struck midnight. Marcus closed the laptop, went back to the dining room where the chess set was still laid out mid-game. Looked at the pieces, frozen in strategy, each one representing possibility and consequence. Thought about inheritance. What it meant to leave something behind. Whether the people you planned to leave it to actually needed it or wanted it, or would just convert it to Tesla payments and book club fundraisers. He sat down at his desk, the oak one Linda had refinished, the one he'd asked Josh about staining even though he had no intention of changing it. Opened the will document. Picked up the red pen, the one that had been sitting unused for days, patient in its potential. Found Vanessa's name on page 3, the primary beneficiary clause, the section that allocated percentages and timelines and trust structures. Drew a single clean line through her name. One stroke, decisive, the red ink bright against the black type. Didn't write a replacement yet. Just that line. His hand was steady. Steadier than it had been in the attorney's office. Steadier than it had been making tea he didn't drink. Steadier than it had any right to be at midnight after scotch and chess and hours of reading about charitable trusts. The fountain pen rested beside his tea mug, the one Linda had given him 20 years ago, white ceramic with blue text that said "World's Okayest Husband." A joke. She'd presented it on their anniversary with a grin, said it was truth in advertising. He'd protested, laughed, used it every morning since. Looked at it now in the desk lamp's light, the ceramic slightly yellowed with age, a small chip on the handle from when he'd dropped it during the earthquake in 2019. Linda had picked it up, checked it for damage, handed it back with a kiss. "Still okay," she'd said. meaning the mug, meaning him, meaning them. Marcus smiled at the mug for the first time in months, set down the red pen. The line through Vanessa's name stayed there, bright and permanent and somehow not angry. Just clear. The decision wasn't revenge, wasn't even disappointment, not really. It was clarity, the kind that comes when you stop measuring your worth by other people's attention and start measuring it by where you want that worth to land. He turned off the desk lamp, left the will on the desk, the red line visible in the moonlight through the window, went to bed, slept better than he had in weeks, dreamed of chess pieces and children's paintings and musicians playing bedside concerts, woke up still certain morning came with that particular November light that makes everything look honest. Sharp edges, no softening, the world exactly what it is. Marcus made coffee, scrambled 2 eggs, ate at the kitchen table with the newspaper open but not really reading it. The will sat on his desk in the other room, that red line doing its quiet work. He'd expected to feel different this morning, guilty maybe, or defiant, or at least uncertain. Instead, he felt like he'd set down something heavy he'd been carrying so long, he'd forgotten it wasn't part of his body. He finished breakfast, washed the dishes, called the number Joel had given him for Anna Reeves, estate attorney. Her receptionist said she had an opening Thursday at 10. Marcus took it. Anna Reeves's office was nothing like the mahogany and crystal picture place where he'd almost signed away everything to Vanessa. This was a converted house in the Arts District, the waiting room full of plants, actual thriving plants, not the decorative kind that looked expensive and died quietly, and framed prints of what looked like local artists' work. Abstract colors, bold lines, the kind of art that didn't apologize for taking up space. The receptionist offered him tea. He accepted. It came in a handmade ceramic mug, the glaze slightly uneven, clearly made by human hands that cared about the object they were creating. He was holding it when Anna came out to greet him. She was younger than he expected, maybe 40, with gray streaks in her dark hair that she hadn't bothered to hide, and glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. Wore slacks and a sweater that looked comfortable, not strategic. Shook his hand firmly, smiled like she meant it, led him back to an office that had more plants, more art, and a desk that was organized chaos. Stacks of files, a coffee mug with cold coffee, sticky notes in 3 colors creating some kind of system only she understood. "So," she said, settling into her chair and pulling out a legal pad, "Joel said you wanted to talk about your will. Said it was complicated." She met his eyes. "Everything's complicated. Tell me what's going on." Marcus told her. The whole thing, the attorney's office, the appointment, Derek's smooth voice saying elective, Vanessa's thumbs-up emoji, the hospice thrift store chess set, the children's self-portrait online that said "This is me being brave." Told her about Linda, about the mug, about sitting in the library watching strangers be decent to each other for no reason. Told her about the red line through Vanessa's name and how his hand hadn't shaken once. Anna listened without interrupting, her pen making occasional notes, her face neutral but present in a way that felt like she was actually filing the information, not just waiting for her turn to talk. When he finished, she set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. The silence stretched for maybe 10 seconds, long enough to feel intentional, not awkward. Finally, she said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with yourself, not with me. Are you doing this from hurt or from clarity?" The question landed clean. Marcus thought about it. Really thought, didn't just reach for the answer that made him sound better. Felt the hurt, it was there. No point pretending it wasn't. Felt the clarity underneath it, or maybe alongside. It, the 2 things occupying the same space, like how you can hear 2 notes at once and they make a chord. "Both," he said finally. "Mostly the latter." Anna nodded like this was the right answer, or at least an honest one. She picked up her pen again. "Then let's figure out what you actually want. Not what you think you should want. Not what would make a good story at Vanessa's Thanksgiving table. What you want your money to mean after you're gone." She opened her laptop, pulled up a document, her fingers already moving over the keys with the efficiency of someone who'd done this enough times to have a template but still treated each case like it was new. "Walk me through it. Every organization, every dollar amount, every thought behind the decision. We'll draft something that reflects who you are, not who you thought you were supposed to be." They worked for 3 hours that first session. Anna asked questions that made him think harder, not just what organizations, but why those specifically, not just how much, but what he hoped that amount would accomplish, not just cutting Vanessa out, but what he wanted to leave her instead, because leaving nothing sometimes says more than leaving everything, and not always what you think it says. By the end, they had a rough structure. 40% to the arts program for underserved kids, the one with Jasmine's self-portrait, the one that taught children their hands could make beauty even when the rest of their lives felt chaotic. 30% to the Hospice Music Foundation, the one that brought guitars and violins to bedsides, that made the exit gentler for people who were scared of silence. 20% to the scholarship fund for first-generation college students, kids who needed someone to say, "I believe you can do this," with money behind the words. 10% to Vanessa, not nothing, not a punishment. Just what felt proportional to the relationship they actually had versus the one he'd been pretending they had. Plus Linda's jewelry, the pearls, the wedding ring, the small diamond earrings her grandmother had left her. Things that carried history, even if that history wasn't being honored the way he'd hoped. Anna scheduled a second session for the following week to finalize language, go over legal requirements, draft the letter he could include explaining his reasoning. "You don't have to write the letter," she said as he was leaving, "but a lot of people find it helps. Closure or clarity or just saying out loud what they need said." Marcus nodded, said he'd think about it, knew already he'd write it. The hip surgery had been rescheduled for a Thursday in mid-December, a date Marcus chose because it was far enough from Thanksgiving that Vanessa couldn't complain about holiday conflicts and close enough to Christmas that if complications arose, he'd have an excuse to skip the family gathering. Derek's parents hosted every year, the one where everyone drank too much wine and talked about their stock portfolios. He didn't tell Vanessa the new date, told Joel, who'd immediately offered to drive him, wait, bring him home, stay the first night if needed. "That's what friends do," Joel had said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Maybe it was. Maybe Marcus had just forgotten what obvious looked like when it came to people showing up. The surgery went fine, 2 hours, general anesthesia, a titanium joint to replace the one that had been grinding itself to dust. Recovery was harder than expected. The pain was manageable with medication, but the helplessness wasn't. Couldn't drive for 6 weeks, couldn't climb stairs without assistance for 2. Needed a walker for the first week, then a cane, then just careful movement and awareness of his body and space. Joel came by every other day with groceries, with books from the library, with updates on his own life that made Marcus laugh and remember there was a world outside his living room that didn't revolve around incisions and physical therapy exercises. The 3rd week post-surgery, Marcus was doing his morning stretches, tedious, painful, necessary, when his laptop chimed with an incoming video call. Vanessa. He almost didn't answer, was sweaty and irritable and not in the mood for performance, but he answered. Her face filled the screen, bright and cheerful in that way people get when they're calling from their office between meetings, multitasking disguised as connection. "Dad, hi, how are you?" She looked good, rested, happy. The book club fundraiser had apparently been a success. She'd mentioned it in a text 3 weeks ago, along with a photo of her standing in front of a banner, champagne glass in hand, surrounded by other women in expensive dresses. "I'm fine, honey. How are you?" Keep it light. Keep it surface. The formula they developed over years of drift, neither of them had named directly. She launched into an update about work, about the kids. Ryan had scored 2 goals in soccer. Emma had gotten lead in the school play. Derek was up for a promotion. Marcus made appropriate sounds, asked appropriate questions, watched her face as she talked, and realized she wasn't actually looking at him, was reading something on another screen, typing occasionally, her attention split 3 ways, and only one of them was this call. "So hey," she said, her tone shifting to that bright efficiency he knew meant she was checking something off a list. "Did you ever reschedule that hip surgery? You said you'd call them back." The question landed wrong, or maybe right, maybe exactly as it was intended. Casual inquiry, not actual concern, just tying up a loose end in her mental inventory of his life. Marcus felt something shift behind his ribs. Not anger exactly. Something colder and clearer. "Handled it," he said simply. She nodded, said, "Good, good," and immediately pivoted to asking if he'd be at Christmas at Derek's parents' house, because they were trying to finalize numbers for catering. They talked for another 6 minutes, mostly about her son's soccer schedule and whether the team might make regionals. She didn't ask how he was recovering, didn't ask if he needed anything, didn't ask who'd driven him or stayed with him, or whether he was managing stairs. The call ended with her saying, "Love you, Dad, gotta run, another meeting," and the screen going black before he could respond. Marcus sat there with his laptop on his knees, the video call window still open showing his own face in the small rectangle where he'd been visible to her. He looked tired. Older than he felt, but not sad. Just clear about what he was seeing. He closed the laptop, picked up his cane, walked slowly to the kitchen and made himself tea in the world's okayest husband mug. Sat at the table and drank it while it was still hot, while the November light came through the window, while somewhere across town his daughter moved between meetings and maybe thought about him for 30 seconds, or maybe didn't. The tea tasted good. That was enough. Some days, that had to be enough. Week 5 post-surgery, Marcus went as an observer to a hospice music session at St. Catherine's, the facility where his 30% would eventually land. Anna had suggested it. Sometimes seeing where the money goes helps confirm you're making the right call. He'd agreed, partly because he wanted to know, partly because sitting at home was making him restless in ways physical therapy couldn't address. The session was in a common room, afternoon light through tall windows, a volunteer named Sarah with a guitar and a gentle voice setting up near a small group of patients in wheelchairs, some with family beside them, some alone. Sarah played old songs, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. What a wonderful world! Something Marcus didn't recognize, but that made an elderly black woman in a blue cardigan start humming along. A man who looked about 80, oxygen tube in his nose, closed his eyes and smiled. His daughter, Marcus assumed daughter, could have been niece or caregiver, held his hand, tears running down her face silently while Sarah sang about skies of blue and clouds of white. One woman, thin and pale, maybe 70, mouthed the words to Over the Rainbow, and when Sarah finished, whispered, "Again?" So Sarah played it again, slower this time, softer, and the woman cried. Just cried. Not from sadness exactly, from something bigger, something about beauty and memory and the fact that she was dying, but still here, still able to feel a song land in her chest and mean something. Marcus watched from a chair against the wall, his cane leaning beside him, and felt his money transform from abstract numbers on a screen to this, Sarah's hands on guitar strings, the elderly man's smile, the daughter's tears, the woman's whispered request for one more song. Presence, not legacy. The difference settled in his chest like a stone finding the bottom of a pond, solid and final and right. He left after an hour, thanked Sarah, drove home carefully because his hip was aching and because he was crying a little and didn't entirely trust his vision. Made it home. Sat in his car in the driveway for 10 minutes, went inside. Didn't regret the red line through Vanessa's name. Not even a little. But doubt came anyway, because doubt always comes at 2 a.m. when you can't sleep and your hip hurts, despite the medication, and your mind starts cataloging all the ways you might be wrong. Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the house quiet except for the furnace clicking on and the sound of his own breathing. Reread the new will in his mind. The percentages, the organizations, the 10% and jewelry for Vanessa. Wondered if he was being petty. If this was just an old man punishing his daughter for being busy, for having a life, for not organizing that life around his needs and schedule. Wondered if 20 years from now she'd tell people her father had been cruel, had cut her out over a missed appointment, and technically she'd be right, even though she'd be missing the point. He got up, put on his robe, went to his desk and turned on the lamp. Pulled out the will. Anna had given him a printed draft to review before the final version. Looked at the red line through Vanessa's name, still there from that first night, permanent marker on his intentions. Picked up the world's okayest husband mug, cold now, the tea long gone. Remembered Linda giving it to him, her grin, her certainty that okay was actually a high compliment, that being consistently decent was harder and more valuable than occasional brilliance. Remembered her at the end, in their bed, holding his hand, saying, "You're going to be fine. You're going to be more than fine." He'd thought she meant practically, finances, logistics, the mechanics of living alone. Maybe she'd meant this, the hard decisions, the clarity that comes from loss. He put the mug down, looked at the will again. The Hospice Music Foundation, Sarah playing guitar, the woman crying during Over the Rainbow. The arts program, Jasmine's self-portrait, This Is Me Being Brave. The scholarship fund, some kid getting to go to college, getting to be first, getting to prove that where you start doesn't determine where you finish. His money making presence possible, making moments possible, making courage possible. Then looked at Vanessa's section, the 10%, the jewelry, the symbolic acknowledgement that she was his daughter even if they weren't close the way he'd hoped, even if love sometimes looked like polite distance and text messages that said, "Handled it." Not petty, not punishment, just honest, just proportional. Just him saying with his estate what he couldn't seem to say in person, that mattering required showing up, that inheritance was earned not just through biology but through presence, that he'd stopped measuring his worth by her attention and started measuring it by where his resources could land with weight. He turned off the lamp, went back to bed, slept better, woke up still certain. Some decisions feel like giving up. This one felt like finding himself again. Thanksgiving happened the way holidays do when you're going through the motions, but not feeling the script. Vanessa invited him to their house. Her text arrived 2 weeks before, cheerful and assumptive, the kind of invitation that wasn't really asking. Marcus went. Brought an expensive bottle of wine Joel had helped him pick out, something that said I made effort without requiring conversation. Derek answered the door, that same firm handshake, that same bright voice. "Dad, good to see you. How's the hip?" Surface question, surface answer. "Better, thanks. Physical therapy is tedious but working." Derek nodded, already turning toward the kitchen where Vanessa was coordinating something involving a turkey and multiple timers. The house was beautiful. Tasteful fall decorations, the kind you buy from catalogs or hire someone to arrange. The grandchildren were polite, came when called to say hello, hugged him briefly, returned to their devices. Ryan mentioned soccer, Emma mentioned her play, both in that rehearsed way kids develop when they're told to talk to relatives they don't really know. Marcus asked follow-up questions. They answered. The conversation died natural deaths, over and over. Vanessa orchestrated everything with the efficiency of someone running a small conference. Seating arrangements, timing on side dishes, keeping wine glasses filled, making sure everything looked like connection, even when it mostly felt like performance. Dinner was fine, the turkey was moist, the mashed potatoes were creamy. Derek talked about cryptocurrency and whether now was the time to buy in. Vanessa talked about the book club's next fundraiser, possibly a wine auction, still in planning stages. Her friend Monica was handling logistics. It would be bigger than last time. Marcus listened, contributed occasionally, watched the dynamics play out like he was anthropologist studying a culture he used to belong to, but had somehow emigrated from without noticing the border crossing. During dessert, store-bought pie, good quality, served on china that probably cost more than his first car, Vanessa mentioned estate planning casually, the way you mentioned needing to change your oil or get the gutters cleaned. "You finished all that paperwork, right, Dad? The will stuff from October?" She said it between bites of pumpkin pie, her tone light, checking a box. Marcus took a sip of coffee. "All set," he said simply. She smiled, relieved, the kind of smile that said good, one less thing to worry about. Derek nodded, said something about how important it was to have things in order, launched into an anecdote about a colleague who died intestate and the nightmare it created for his family. Marcus listened, ate his pie, felt nothing sharpen inside him, no anger, no hurt, just the quiet observation that this was the relationship they had, and pretending otherwise had been exhausting. He left after 2 hours, claiming fatigue from the hip recovery. Vanessa walked him to the door, kissed his cheek, said, "Love you, Dad. So glad you came." Meant it in the way people mean polite things, the way you mean have a nice day to a cashier. He drove home through empty streets, everyone inside with their families, their real families, the ones where showing up meant more than checking boxes. Got home, made tea, sat in his living room with the lights off, just the glow from the street lamp outside, and felt grateful. Not for the dinner, for the clarity, for knowing exactly what he had and what he didn't, and not needing to pretend anymore. Marcus started volunteering at the arts program in January, after his physical therapist cleared him for normal activities, and he'd gotten clearance from his hip to sit for extended periods without everything seizing up. The program ran out of a converted warehouse in the arts district, high ceilings and paint-splattered floors, and the kind of creative chaos that comes from 30 kids making art simultaneously. His first day, the director, a woman named Keisha, with box braids and paint under her fingernails, gave him a quick tour and stationed him at the painting table, helping kids mix colors and frame canvases and not worry so much about staying inside lines. The kids ranged from 6 to 14, mostly from neighborhoods where after-school programs meant the difference between supervision and streets, between learning and survival. A 9-year-old named Aisha took to Marcus immediately, maybe because he didn't hover, didn't correct, just sat beside her and mixed colors when she asked, and offered opinions when requested, and otherwise let her paint what she wanted to paint. She was working on a self-portrait, round face, big eyes, hair in 2 puffs, holding a paintbrush that was bigger than her painted body. "That's me being an artist," she explained, unprompted. "My mom works 2 jobs, so I come here after school. Miss Keisha says I'm good at colors." "You are good at colors," Marcus said, watching her mix red and yellow into an orange that looked like sunrise. "That orange is perfect." Aisha beamed, added it to the painting, started talking about her mom, about how tired she always was, about how Aisha wanted to make something beautiful to put in their apartment so her mom could look at it and smile. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, not painfully, just opening, letting something new in. This kid would remember this moment, the warehouse, the paint, someone saying her orange was perfect. Vanessa wouldn't remember the book club fundraiser in 5 years. The contrast was documentary. He volunteered every Wednesday afternoon after that. Learned the kids' names, their stories, what they loved to paint, what made them frustrated. Helped Aisha finish her self-portrait, then start a series of paintings about things that made her happy: her mom's hands, their cat, the view from their apartment window at sunset. Watched a 13-year-old named Marcus, ironic coincidence, paint increasingly abstract pieces that Keisha said showed real talent, real vision. Brought extra supplies sometimes, good brushes, paint that didn't come from the dollar store, canvas boards so the kids could take their work home and hang it properly. Keisha thanked him every time, said the kids talked about Mr. Marcus all week, said his presence mattered more than his supplies, even though the supplies helped. One Wednesday in late January, Aisha's mom came to pick her up early, a thin black woman who looked exhausted in that bone-deep way that comes from working 16-hour days and still worrying about rent. She introduced herself as Shanice, shook Marcus's hand, thanked him for helping Aisha. "She talks about you all the time," Shanice said, her smile tired but genuine. "Says you're teaching her about colors. I can't afford art classes, so this program—" She trailed off, the gratitude too big for the sentence. Marcus said it was his pleasure, that Aisha was talented, that she should keep painting. Shanice left with Aisha, who waved goodbye like he was someone who mattered. That night, Marcus sat in his living room and cried. The good kind of tears, the kind that come from feeling useful, from mattering in ways that were visible and immediate and real. Called Joel, told him about Aisha and her paintings and how her mom worked 2 jobs. Joel said, "See, that's what your money is going to do. Not sit in a trust fund, actually change things." Marcus agreed, hung up. Looked at the world's okayest husband mug on his coffee table, Linda's joke that had become his touchstone. Felt okay, more than okay. Felt aligned in ways he hadn't since before Linda died, maybe longer. The final will was signed on February 12th, a cold Tuesday with snow threatening but not quite falling. Anna had prepared everything. The legal language, the allocation percentages, the letter he decided to write after all, sealed in an envelope with instructions to open it after his death. The letter wasn't long. 3 paragraphs. Explained his reasoning without apologizing for it, acknowledged Vanessa without pretending they were closer than they were, expressed hope that she'd understand even if she didn't agree. Ended with, "I needed my life to matter to people who needed it to matter. I hope that makes sense to you. If it doesn't now, maybe it will later. Love, Dad." He signed the will. Anna signed as witness. Her paralegal signed as second witness. The documents went into a fireproof safe in Anna's office. Copies to Marcus, everything official and irrevocable unless he chose to revoke it, which he wouldn't. Walking out of her office that afternoon, snow finally starting to fall in fat, lazy flakes, Marcus felt lighter. The heaviness he'd been carrying since October, maybe since Linda died, maybe since some point in Vanessa's adolescence when they'd started drifting and neither knew how to stop it, lifted. Not gone completely, just manageable. Just proportional to what it was, rather than what he'd been telling himself it should be. He drove home carefully, the roads getting slick. Made himself dinner, pasta with olive oil and garlic. Simple, the kind of meal Linda used to make when neither of them felt like cooking, but they still wanted to eat together. Opened the good wine. Poured a glass. Raised it to her photo on the mantel, the one from the Grand Canyon, both of them squinting and grinning. "I think I did it," he said out loud. "I think I figured out what you meant." The photo didn't answer, obviously, but he felt Linda's presence anyway, or maybe just his memory of her presence, which after 3 years was close enough to the same thing. Christmas card season brought its annual ritual of sorting through glossy photos and printed greetings from people whose lives looked perfect in 2x3-inch rectangles. Vanessa's arrived in early December, professionally shot like always, Her and Derek and the kids arranged on their porch, everyone in coordinated outfits that probably required a planning session and a shopping trip. Inside, the message was printed in script font. Wishing you joy and peace this holiday season. The Morrison family. Generic. Professional. The kind of card you'd send to a colleague or distant cousin, not your father. Marcus propped it on the mantel beside Linda's photo. The contrast was sharp, Linda's candid grin versus Vanessa's arranged smile. Both his family. Neither feeling like what he'd thought family meant when he was young, and assumed love was automatic rather than chosen. New Year's Eve, Marcus hosted Joel and 2 other old friends, Richard from the old neighborhood, Tom from his bowling league days. They'd all been at Linda's funeral, had checked on him regularly that first terrible year, had gradually settled into this comfortable rhythm of getting together every few months to play cards and tell stories and remember when their lives had been different. Tonight Marcus brought out the thrift store chess set, taught Richard how to play, while Tom and Joel argued good-naturedly about whether the 80s had better music than the 70s. They drank good whiskey. The bottle Linda had given him was long gone, replaced by one Joel brought, then another Richard contributed. Told stories about Linda, about their own wives, about being young and stupid and lucky to have survived their 20s. The laughter came easy. No performance required, no checking boxes or making appropriate conversation. Just 4 old men who'd known each other long enough to be honest about their regrets and their relief, their losses and their strange, unexpected joys. Marcus realized this was family, too, the kind you choose by showing up, by calling when someone needs calling, by driving someone home from surgery and not keeping score. Biology created one kind of family, presence created another, both were real. Only one had shown up consistently. Mid-January brought a phone call Marcus didn't expect. Shanice, Aisha's mom, who'd somehow gotten his number from Keisha, apologetic about calling but needing to thank him. "I don't know if you remember," she said, her voice uncertain, "but you've been helping my daughter at the art program?" Marcus remembered. Shanice continued, talking fast like she'd rehearsed this. "You donated those canvas boards last month. Aisha's been painting every night. Her teacher saw one of her pieces, submitted it to some student art show. She won 3rd place. They gave her a $50 gift card to the art supply store." Shanice's voice broke. "I just needed you to know. She talks about you all the time. Calls you Mr. Marcus like you're someone famous." Marcus sat down at his kitchen table, the phone pressed to his ear, and felt tears coming again. "That's wonderful," he managed. "She's so talented. Tell her I'm proud of her." They talked for another 5 minutes, Shanice sharing how much the program meant, how without it, Aisha would just be at home alone until Shanice got off work at 10, how having somewhere to go where people believed in her was changing everything. When they hung up, Marcus sat with the phone in his lap for a long time. Called Anna, left a message asking if they could increase the percentage to the arts program. 40% wasn't enough. He wanted it to be 50. Wanted more Aishas to have canvas boards and someone to tell them their orange was perfect. February brought a text from Vanessa asking about Easter plans. Derek's parents were hosting again. Could he make it? They needed numbers for ham. Marcus looked at the text, typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Finally wrote, "I'll let you know closer to the date." Sent it. She responded with a thumbs up emoji, always the thumbs up emoji. He set the phone down, made tea in the world's okayest husband mug, sat at the kitchen table where the legal pad used to hold his one underlined question, "What do I actually want to matter?" and now held a grocery list and a sketch Aisha had given him last week, a rainbow made of thumbprints, every color overlapping, her name signed in the corner in careful letters. His phone buzzed with Vanessa's follow-up text. "Also, we're thinking about summer plans, maybe a family trip to the lake house Derek's parents are renting. Would you want to come?" Marcus looked at the message. At the casual way she asked, the assumption that he'd want to spend a week watching Derek's parents hold court and the grandchildren play on their devices. Thought about answering. Thought about saying yes, because that's what fathers do. They show up to family trips even when family feels like people going through motions. Thought about saying no because he had volunteering on Wednesdays and chess nights with Joel and a life that had started. To feel like his again rather than something he was performing in. He'd answer later. Or maybe he wouldn't. Maybe closer to summer he'd have a conflict. Something important, something that mattered more than being a placeholder at someone else's vacation. The thought didn't make him sad, made him free. He sipped his tea, looked at Aisha's rainbow thumbprints, remembered Shanice's voice breaking as she talked about her daughter winning third place in an art show. This was mattering. This was what he'd wanted his life to mean. Not trust funds sitting in accounts waiting for people who'd use them for car payments. Not being the extra body at Easter dinner who got a polite kiss on the cheek and a thumbs-up emoji. The tea was hot, exactly the right temperature. The morning light came through the window clear and honest, no softening, the world exactly what it was. Marcus set down the mug, picked up Aisha's rainbow, propped it against the salt shaker where he could see it while he ate breakfast. His phone sat on the table, Vanessa's question unanswered, the cursor blinking patiently. He'd deal with it eventually. Right now, he had tea to drink and light to sit in, and a sketch made by a 9-year-old who thought he was someone famous. Right now, the room felt exactly the right size. Not too big, not too small, just enough space for a man who'd figured out what he wanted to matter and made it matter and could sit with that decision without apology or second-guessing. The mug fit his hands like it always did, like it was made for mornings that mean something. Linda's joke about him being okay had turned out to be wisdom. Okay was actually extraordinary when you stopped measuring it against some imaginary standard of perfect and started measuring it against whether you felt aligned with your own values, your own choices, your own definition of what leaving something behind actually meant. He finished his tea slowly, present in the warmth, in the ceramic against his palms, in the sketch of overlapping colors that a child made because someone told her she was good at mixing orange. Outside, the February morning was cold and clear. Inside, Marcus sat at his table with his mug and his tea and his rainbow sketch and his unanswered phone and felt more at home in his own life than he'd felt in years. Not because everything was perfect, because everything was honest, because he'd drawn a red line through the pretending and replaced it with presence, with purpose, with the kind of mattering that left marks in the world, in hospice rooms where music played, in warehouses where kids learned their hands could make beauty, in scholarship applications where first-generation students got told someone believed in them with money behind the belief. The mug was empty now. The morning was passing. Wednesday was 3 days away. Aisha would show him whatever she'd painted this week, probably ask his opinion on colors, definitely smile when he said her work was getting better every time. Joel would call later this week about chess night. Anna had the will in her fireproof safe, the letter sealed, everything documented and clear. Vanessa would expect an answer eventually about Easter, about summer, about showing up to events where he'd be acknowledged but not needed, present but not seen. He stood up, set the world's okayest husband mug in the sink, looked out the window at the neighbor's yard where snow was melting in patches, revealing grass that had been dormant but was still alive underneath, still ready for spring whenever spring decided to arrive. That was him. Dormant through grief, through the slow drift away from his daughter, through the performance of being whoever people needed him to be, but still alive underneath, still ready for whatever came next. Still okay, which Linda had always known was the highest compliment she could give. He smiled, turned from the window. The day stretched ahead with its ordinary tasks and its small joys. He'd fill it well.